Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about A Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin. So we're mostly going to talk about this in terms of the magic system because that is the biggest takeaway I got from the story. And honestly, I think this book, as well as the rest of the series, is so well known in like fantasy circles that we don't really need to go through the plot too much. But we of course are going to touch on it. So yeah, with that being said, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and if you're interested, you can check out my Patreon. The link is in the description. So let's begin. So, A Wizard of Earthsea, one of the early fantasy books from the 60s. It is a very well known fantasy book within certain circles. It is nowhere near as famous or as well known as I think it should be. Like, Ursula K. Le Guin should be in every conversation when people bring up Tolkien or C.S. Lewis or anyone of that caliber, even like Asimov or anyone like that, because she is really that good. Like, her work is like that lauded, and she's won so many like literary awards and things. And a lot of her stuff like is famous because she has, for like the entirety of her career, as far as I can tell, has been a huge advocate for social progressivism. So she is constantly like just regularly putting in people of color and stuff as her main characters, and like regularly talking about gender politics and like all this kind of stuff that is even now today so many people are pushing back against it and that kind of stuff. I couldn't imagine the kind of pushback she got like in the 60s and 70s when she was doing this stuff on the regular. So she's definitely one of the trailblazers, and she's definitely somebody that should be in those conversations when we talk about the greats. So this one, Tales of Earthsea, or sorry, there's so many subtitles and like secondary titles for this series because there's the Earthsea cycle, there's the Earthsea saga, there's the Earthsea trilogy, then there's the Ghibli movie, the Tales of Earthsea, and like so the series kind of goes by multiple names. But apparently, this book was actually born out of a suggestion by someone. People were saying that her sci fi and fantasy work and stuff was like so well done that it would probably be a good idea for her to write something that's aimed at younger readers. So, this was like her first time writing something that was directly aimed at young adult readers. So, that's really interesting to get something that's like aimed at young adults but still is this mature. You would think that someone would have to put in very deliberate effort to make something like that, something aimed at young adults, but is still very mature and introspective and very, kind of self effacing, really. It's pretty awesome that she does that because nowadays, like, there's a lot of people that are actively trying to do that, like to write more mature things aimed at younger audiences and stuff, but so often they drop the ball with it. So to see that she's been knocking it out of the park for so long is just really awesome. So the story itself is fairly straightforward. It's one of those very like quintessential kind of fantasy tales. It's very much a coming of age story. So a lot of the points in the story might be at least somewhat familiar, but everything in the story that is familiar has this kind of introspective kind of lean to it. So even though it was fairly familiar to me, I was still fairly like excited about the way it was being approached. So I really enjoyed it. So let's kind of talk a little bit about the plot in general so we can kind of talk more about the magic system because that is of course the thing I'm most interested in. We So the world of Earthsea is a planet that is similar to Earth, but the land masses are completely different. So they, instead of any large bodies that we would call continents, the entire planet is covered in small islands. It's basically known as the archipelago. So it's really just a huge cluster of islands, which in concept is really cool. So this planet is also like a very like clear cut kind of fantasy world. I mean, granted, there are no like elves and dwarves and things as far as we know. There might be some creatures that are analogous to that, but at least in this first book, nothing like that is touched on. But the most famous of all fantasy creatures is, of course, touched on, and that is dragons. So this is a world that is very much populated with magic and wizards and dragons and all kinds of stuff. So it's really interesting to kind of see this journey in this kind of established world that's kind of more familiar because a lot of people nowadays in modern fantasy are very much deliberately trying to create this atmosphere. But this one, for whatever reason, it just feels like so naturalistically placed. So it just works really well for me. So we follow our main character Ged, who's also known as Sparrowhawk and also Dunny, because in this world the main magic system, of course, permeates the culture and everything. So the magic system is that of naming. So basically true names. So the naming of a person is even, significant and slightly different. It also takes a lot of inspiration from a lot of real world cultures and stuff. Like some cultures will delay naming a new child before some time has passed, before they basically get to know the child more, so that they can give them a more fitting name instead of just choosing one. So it's kind of more in line with that. So essentially, the child who becomes Ged is known as Dunny from basically birth until like 12 or so, because that's like his childhood name. And at 13 he becomes a man, he comes of age, and he gets his true name. So it's kind of interesting. But because the world exists in such a way where true names hold power, the majority of the people, almost everyone, goes by a nickname. So his nickname becomes Sparrowhawk because that's one of the first animals he essentially learns how to call when he starts to kind of learn a little bit of magic randomly. He's a magical adept who will become the greatest wizard of Earthsea, but in his early days, he's, fairly ignorant of it. He hears a chant that his aunt does in order to call all the goats back to her, and he just like instantly memorizes it after hearing her say it. And later on, like as the goats are roaming around and stuff, and he needs to like herd them back in, he says the poem as well, and it works like it did for her, where they all come running at him and stuff, and he's like so excited and interested by it. He says it again, and they all basically keep like prodding and getting closer to him and stuff, basically like responding as though like, you called us, like what do you want? You called us, like we're here, like what do you want? That kind of thing. So he kind of gets freaked out by it and like runs off, and they, because they're still enchanted, essentially they're just chasing him because they're still following him. So he's like freaking out. So he's basically unleashed what would be essentially his first spell, and immediately loses control of it. So immediately we're kind of seeing this idea of the magic is fairly simple and can be kind of stumbled upon, but it's also like it clearly takes a lot of knowledge and skill, because like you have to know how to undo what you're doing. You can't just unleash things, because that is ultimately where you will see the major consequences of your actions. So after seeing this, his aunt basically says, "Okay, clearly you're a magical adept." So she essentially goes to teach him. But one of the interesting things that's just kind of like blinking you miss it, she essentially tells him to recite a spell that will have him essentially be under her control. Any of his magic that he does would ultimately be in her service, but for whatever reason, because his power level, that spell doesn't bind and it doesn't work on him. And she essentially never mentions it, never, say anything else about it again. And she just goes, "Okay, I can't do that." And then she kind of realizes like his skill level and like potential is well above hers. So later on after that, just they end up getting basically attacked. The village gets raided by people from another one of the islands, which appears, as far as I can tell at this point, is the only island with anyone that has pale skin, because like everyone on the planet is either copper skin or dark brown like me, or even darker and stuff like that. So I always thought that was really cool. I'm like, wow, an actual fantasy book where the majority of the characters are essentially black, or just POC in general. Like, so it's kind of cool. It's actually ironically reflective of the real world, but whatever. So it's interesting, like the people from the other place, which also becomes slightly relevant later in later books. They basically come to raid the island that they're on, to raid their village and stuff. And Ged, he uses his like barely, his little bit of knowledge that he got from his aunt, who basically, instead of helping the people, she just flees and goes to a cage and like binds it with a bunch of spells to like barricade herself in, and basically abandons everyone, which is so messed up. Ged, though, he tries to figure out what he can do, because he's not a fighter. He's not like a physical fighter, so he's trying to figure out what he can do. And he's learned a little bit of weather magic and a little bit of illusion magic. So he basically combines these concepts and creates a like an illusionary army, but also they're shrouded in this huge fog and stuff. So it basically allows him to distract the people that are raiding, and allows all the people that need to escape, while allowing the villagers who are able to fight to use guerrilla tactics and attack back and actually win and drive them away. So he basically immediately like gets this great reputation, but the use of that magic was so much that he hyper exhausted himself and he falls into a coma. And some time later, a fully established, fully trained wizard named Ogion comes because he was able to sense the power from a very far distance away. So he comes to him to basically see what's going on, and he wakes him from this coma using his magic to heal him. So it's really cool. He basically takes him, saying, when he turns 13, he becomes, of age or whatever. I'm going to take him to be my mentor, and we're going to train him in the ways of magery, as one of the words they use, which I really like that word, to train him in magery, which is like really, really cool. So he essentially gets a Gandalf, like a Gandalf or a Dumbledore, basically shows up at his door, like, come on, you're going to go be a wizard. Let's go learn magic. Like, that's so cool. And essentially, he was still 12 at the time. They're like, so you have to wait till he's 13. So Ogion's like, okay, I'll come back on his name day and stuff, and we'll do the naming ritual and stuff. And they do the naming ritual, which is where Ogion names him Ged. That's where he gets his true name. So from there, it basically kind of hits the ground running. Like, we go off with Ogion, and this is when Ged makes his second, like, large mistake. He essentially is trying to learn from Ogion. He's trying to be a good mentee, like he's trying to be an apprentice. That's the word I'm using. He's trying to be like a good apprentice and stuff. But Ogion is teaching him like balance and patience and this kind of stuff. And Ged really just wants to learn some spells. He's like, why aren't we doing any magic? We should be doing all kinds of interesting magic every day. But like, you barely speak to me, and we're mostly just hanging out, and like you're teaching me herbs and things. Like, so he's trying to teach him like all the fundamentals, like the very core stuff that he needs to know that'll help him be better later on. But of course, him being young, he's very impatient. So he essentially tells him, look, I know that you're being very impatient. You don't want to stick and, deal with my method of teaching. So if you want, I can send you over to the official wizard school, and you can learn, under typical teachers, essentially, with other magical adept people as well. And it's pretty much in that moment that Ged kind of realizes that he's come to love Ogion. He's been with him for a while, and like he's like the one of the few people that treat him like an actual person and not just like a commodity or anything like that. So like he actually realizes like he loved him, like he was a surrogate father and stuff, but he still makes the decision to go to the official wizard school. And this is where we kind of get some of the other stuff. So before this happens, though, Ged meets this young girl that lives near Ogion, and she's essentially like prodding him and like kind of almost taunting him, kind of doing that thing where people are challenging you, trying to coax a reaction out of you. She's essentially trying to get him to use magic. So she's like basically trying to get him to want to prove himself, essentially. And Ogion basically says she is basically working for her mother, who is essentially trying to like sneakily learn more spells and stuff because she's a witch or wants to be a witch, but they don't serve the same master. Like Ogion serves the light and stuff, and he like, I don't know who she serves, but I'm not trying to give her any spells or make her any more powerful at all. So he's basically advising him to stop hanging out with that girl, and he essentially like listens but doesn't listen. And of course they interact again, where she keeps goading him and like pushing him on and stuff. So he goes to try to essentially they're looking through the magic books that Ogion has and stuff, and he come across a summoning spell, and he's basically tempted to say the spell, but is going to like is he seems like he's not going to, but he is then automatically compelled to start reading the spell, and he starts to summon this thing, but Ogion makes it back just in time to stop him. So like he stops him from making this huge mistake, doing something that he had no control over and stuff. And then that was essentially when they have the conversation, and he sends him to the official wizard school. So here, it's kind of very typical, but he meets a little Draco Malfoy, this kid named Jasper, who they basically butt heads for years. At this point, it's becoming kind of common knowledge that Ged is like incredibly powerful. He's definitely got the potential to be the best wizard in all of Earthsea and that kind of stuff. So people, of course, are challenging him. This kid Jasper, who comes from an affluent background and stuff, is like trying to put him down and stuff. And Ged is, of course, like at this point, it's been a few years, so he's probably 14, 15 or so at this point. But of course, still young and immature and like just full of ego and stuff. So they essentially get into this wizard battle where he's taunting him and stuff and like saying, oh, I can do this, I can do that. Shall I summon this woman from thousands of years ago? And like all this kind of stuff. So like he does this very arrogantly, and he goes to automatically recite the spell that he saw in Ogion's book. For whatever reason, he has it perfectly memorized after only glancing at it. And then he goes to recite the spell. And because he has learned quite a bit at this time, he does essentially succeed at summoning the woman from 2,000 years ago. He at least summons an image of her, and she's like looking over her shoulder and stuff and looking at them. But then it immediately goes out of control. It's like he opened the door and something else comes through. A dark spirit that's like a mass of just shadow. It's just pure shadow that like comes from the rift essentially and jumps on him and like starts mauling him and like scratches up his face. So Ged ends up disfigured and ends up with this permanent scar. Before the smoke creature, the shadow creature, can kill him, the archmage, the main principal essentially, shows up to where they were doing magic, and he dispels it. He basically drives it off. He can't even dispel it or lock it away or anything. He drives it off, but he ends up having to use all of his power, which kills him. So now Ged is basically responsible for his principal's death, who was also basically trying to help train him to realize his potential and stuff. So of course after this he feels like this level of guilt and everything, but the book doesn't really dwell on it. We kind of do a time skip and kind of jump ahead. And like so we kind of just go ahead past that. But essentially after all of his training and stuff, he becomes this really, really known wizard, and he just kind of becomes like a Gandalf. He's going wandering around like he's helping in his town and stuff, where they're basically being attacked by dragons and stuff constantly. And he's like, oh, okay, I'll just go casually go slay a couple of dragons and stuff. And he slays one, and then there's this one that's like a huge elder dragon and stuff. And that one is probably a huge threat to the archipelago. So he's trying to figure out how to essentially keep the archipelago safe and make sure the dragon doesn't show up and stuff. And the dragon is essentially trying to tempt him, like, I know the true name of the thing that follows you. Like, it's telling him that he knows the true name of the shadow. And so he can either get the true name, gaining power over the thing that's been chasing him forever, and deal with that while essentially abandoning this town and leaving this huge threat to go attack the archipelago, or he can deal with it here. And he of course makes the right decision, because by this time he's wised up quite a bit. He's learned a lot of lessons and stuff, and he's also actually done enough research to realize he knows this dragon's true name. So he uses the dragon's true name and compels a promise from the dragon to never come to the archipelago and never like harm people and stuff. So essentially he slays the dragon without having to slay the dragon. So it's just like another instance to show like how much he's learned, how much he's matured, how much his arrogance and like overly large ego has basically been tampered down and stuff. Because typically before he probably would have gone with the most bombastic big magic thing he could think of, but in this he decided to be subtle about it essentially. So it's really, really cool the way we're able to kind of follow this journey and see his personality develop and see him actually become wiser and stuff. So it's a lot of fun. I like that. And a lot of the rest of the stuff that happens throughout the story is similar. We get a lot of introspective stuff. We get a lot of internal like understanding of these things, only to ultimately have him face the shadow and realize that the shadow is him. The shadow has his same true name, and he calls the true name and essentially reabsorbs it. He becomes whole again, because that was essentially his negative aspects that he had to come to grips with and learn and basically deal with and process, and mature through. So he essentially does that, and then he recombines himself with that, and he becomes whole and healed again. So it's really, really cool. It's a great story. I really like it. And I like how I started off by saying I'm not going to like relitigate the entire story, which I just kind of did anyway. But either way, I still want to talk about the magic. So the magic isn't even as explicitly used in the narrative of the story as you would think, but there's so much detail about the way the magic works. And it's just this kind of concept that has existed for a long time in general. It's this concept of true names. So the first time I was ever actually exposed to this type of magic system was in Aragon. And I still like the explanation that I got from the Aragon movie when I saw it, when one of my favorite actors, Jeremy Irons, gives the explanation. He says the word is the thing. If you know the words, you can control the thing. And that was probably the most comprehensive explanation I ever needed for this type of magic. And it carries through. So the same way the magic system kind of works in Aragon, it's the same thing here. Except there, the entire language that is all of the true words is spoken fluently by the elves. That doesn't exist in this story. So it's essentially just, they don't even really quantify it as a language, even though it is a language. So like a tree has a true name, but the tree has a true name, but so does each branch, each leaf, each twig, like all that kind of thing. So it goes far more nuanced. Even though Aragon does kind of lean in that direction, it's far more nuanced in Earthsea. And I'm kind of surprised that the first official, like, fully formed version of this type of magic system I came across was in Aragon, considering how old of a concept it is. Going all the way back to ancient Egypt, the goddess Isis tricked the sun god Ra by poisoning him, and she essentially told him she can heal him if he gives her his true name. And he does, and she uses it to basically usurp him, essentially. So, like in ancient Egypt, it's a thing. Even in ancient Greece, like with Odysseus, when he is trapped in the cave with the Cyclops Polyphemus, and he puts his eye out, and Polyphemus says, like, he's asking, who did this? Who did this? And Odysseus replies, nobody. So when Polyphemus screams out for help to his brothers, he says, nobody has attacked me. And so, therefore, he's basically rendered powerless to actually ask for help, because his brothers basically, like, oh, why is he just yelling? Nobody attacked him. Like, so it's kind of more of a trick than a true name, but it really does still exemplify the true strength that is in a name. It's like the Shakespeare quote, would a rose by any other name smell as sweet? Because a name is arbitrary. The thing is the thing. The core of what it is goes beyond just its name. Not only does this concept exist, of course, in real life and real mythology, but it's made its way into many different fantasy series. I've already mentioned Aragon, but also Rick Riordan's The Kane Chronicles series. Much like in the mythology around Isis and Ra, the Egyptian pantheon makes use of names in a very similar way. So it's basically the exact same logic. The true names have major power. So, like, they always have to pay attention to them. Even though their spells work a little differently, it's not purely the backbone of their magic, but true names is a significant part. As well as the King Killer Chronicles. One of the secondary magic systems that exists in that series revolves around a group of people called namers. And they know the true names of things, and it allows them to kind of animate or, basically it gives them magical control over things that they can name. And of course, Harry Potter. Like, it can be argued that Harry Potter uses a similar naming convention, even though it kind of blends a few type of magic systems together. So you could say that the spells are essentially invoking the true names of things as they do them. But there's a little, it's kind of a gray area, because there's a lot of extra things thrown on top of it that kind of dilutes that idea. But of course, the main focus of this video, it goes back to one of the first ones to really use a thorough version of it, and that is the Tales of Earthsea. So this magic system that is very much based on words and language and names is very much a magic system that is designed to produce scholarly type characters. So I think it works so brilliantly to have this kind of classical wizard type character who's essentially one of the archetypes that, Gandalf and, the things that inspired Dumbledore, characters like Odin and his old wanderer visage and stuff like that. So a lot of that just feels like a lot of the building blocks that creates this character archetype. So it also is very much a interesting kind of idea on the difference between magic users. So there's like a mage there's a magician, a mage, a sorcerer, and a wizard. More often than not, the distinction between these types comes down to how they gain their power. Like a sorcerer, similar to the root name sorcerer, source, sorcerers often draw their power from a source, from items, from a deity, from, something like that. A magician is often a trickster, kind of an illusionist. Sometimes they will have access to actual, like, magic within that world, but oftentimes it's kind of an illusionist. Versus a mage is kind of someone who is on a similar level of a wizard, but not quite the same, even though in Earthsea they're almost used interchangeably. It is someone who is very learned in magic, but not necessarily just pure magic, I'll say. Meaning, when I say not pure magic, I mean a mage is someone who also, granted in Earthsea they also do this as well, but a mage is someone who more likely will use like talismans and potions and herbs and like those kind of things to like make a lot of their magic works. But here a wizard is someone, they also do potions and that kind of thing as well, but their primary thing is just being incredibly learned and not ancient language, because that's what they call it in Aragon, but in the language of the true names. So of course this lends itself to like characters who are very wise, very stoic, very knowing and stuff. So it's one of the fundamental pieces of this general archetype that exists, and I think it's really really cool. I like it a lot. I only run across, as I said, so many different examples of how many magic systems uses this as the root of the magic, and it lends itself to such interesting and thorough character types. It's just such a fun addition to many different magic systems. The idea of power being in a name is such a profound concept to me. I really like the idea, and I can barely articulate why I like it. I think it has this flavor of a level of existentialism that I just really love, because it kind of, despite the fact that the name and the word is so important, because the name and the word is the thing, in my mind it only helps to further separate it, because a name is a word that's just something that is essentially made up, but a true name is something that is associated with the true core, the true identity of what a thing is. So to me, they just feel like completely different things, despite the fact that you have to use language and basic words to say the true name. So it's like it's a distinction without a difference. But in my mind, it makes a huge difference. It's kind of like a double meaning in my own mind. It's like labels are meaningless, yet labels have so much power. Like it feels like just a pure contradiction, but to me it makes perfect sense. So I guess we're gonna go ahead and leave it there. Let me know in the comments down below. Like, do you agree or understand what I mean when I say that labels are meaningless, but they also hold so much power? Like, what do you think about the idea of a word-based magic system in True Names? And have you read A Wizard of Earthsea or any of the other follow-ups books that I actually haven't run into yet? Let me know about that in the comments down below. And of course, let's just ramble. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about magic systems and fun fantasy stuff that we haven't talked about before. So yeah, as always, thank you so much for watching. Make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Check out the Patreon if you're interested. And of course, I will talk to you all next time. Peace.